And hello, everybody. Welcome back to today's post-daily news update. I am Wai Ting. John Pollock is manning the site. He will be back with me tonight for Rewind at Dynamite, 10 p.m. Eastern time here at postwrestling.com, youtube.com/postwrestling as well. But joining me for today's post-daily news update, we have our continuing roster of guest hosts, and joining me is fan favorite, Bruce Lord. Welcome back, Bruce.
Thanks. Way like a bad penny, just keep turning up. But, hopefully able to step in ably in the wonderful way that, folks like Kate and Nate have been doing over the last few days.
So even though John is not here tonight, as I mentioned, he is manning the site. So plenty of his work that is going up right now at postwrestling.com. He will also be joining us in the form of a pre-recorded interview. Of course, many people will be aware that Tony Khan recently spoke at the Collision Conference, which was a bit of a tech conference taking place here in Toronto with a lot of notable names, gave a bit of a presentation on AEW, and John sent us over some notes from his presentation that we'll talk about. But what we'll play first here is a little bit of a quick little interview that John got with Tony Khan. Now, I was told that this was very lucky that he even got this amount of time, this little quick 5 minutes here with Tony Khan, because he was in the midst of going from one thing to another. But Tony Khan managed to graciously make some time for our own John Pollock. And here's that chat here right now on Post Daily News.
John Pollock here at Post Wrestling, joined by AEW's Tony Khan. Tony, it's great to meet you up here in Toronto. Tell me just a bit about the Collision Conference itself and coming up here. This is the day before TV, I'm sure. What is a typical Tuesday like for you before going live on Wednesday nights?
Well, it involves flying into a city, and this week that city is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have AEW Dynamite. It is our 142nd episode of AEW Dynamite, and it's going to be an amazing night. A match a lot of fans would not have ever thought was possible, even months ago, now is happening on Wednesday Night Dynamite this week. It'll be on TBS in America, on TSN here in Canada, and it is going to be Chris Jericho and Lance Archer teaming up against Jon Moxley and Hiroshi Tanahashi ahead of their match for the interim AEW World Championship at Forbidden Door on Sunday on pay-per-view. Available here on Bleacher Report in the U.S. and Canada. It's going to be a great pay-per-view, and it's going to be a great Dynamite on Wednesday. And I'm up here at Collision in Canada to talk to the great fans who watch AEW Dynamite on TSN, and also hopefully meet some new fans, make some new friends. And I've met a lot of great people, and so many great fans have come up and said they love watching AEW here on TSN. It was really cool to have so many people come up to me and say thank you, because I know during a very strict lockdown here in Canada, a lot of wrestling fans got their fill of pro wrestling watching AEW Dynamite on TSN on Wednesday nights, which was awesome to hear so many fans saying. So I'm really grateful to be here at Collision, and nice to meet you in person, John, and be able to talk to the fans about AEW.
Tell me a little bit about the dynamic of yourself and Ghetto in terms of preparing Forbidden Door, and what that has been like as, for someone that, spearheads the creative on the AEW side. What has this collaborative effort been like? And is it largely you two that are putting together this pay-per-view? Tell me a little bit about the dynamics of putting together this show on Sunday.
Well, I think we both have great offices. Ghetto has Rocky Romero and a number of very intelligent people that work with him in New Japan Pro Wrestling. I have a great office and a lot of smart people that work with me, but it is primarily myself and Ghetto, and the two of us have both put forward the top wrestlers from AEW and many top wrestlers from New Japan Pro Wrestling, and they're going to come together on Sunday for a great pay-per-view event. And this Wednesday on Dynamite, we'll see a lot of their top wrestlers coming in. We've already announced Tanahashi in that great tag match, again teaming with Moxley versus Jericho and Archer. And also we got Will Ospreay coming in for a trios match, teaming with Aussie Open versus Orange Cassidy, Trent Beretta, and Rocky Romero ahead of Forbidden Door. And a lot of other great stars from New Japan will be in for the show this week. We have Penta versus Malachi Black in the All-Atlantic Finals qualifying match. So much ahead of the big pay-per-view this week on Dynamite, and a lot more. Bryan Danielson will be there to address the fans. And also Canada's own Christian Cage following his big turn on Jungle Boy, I'll be very interested to hear what Christian Cage has to say for himself, and there's a lot more to look forward to this week on AEW Dynamite on TBS in America and TSN here in Canada. And I just wanted to be able to come up and talk to the fans about what we do every week, and it's a great conference, and I was honored to be invited to speak here. So I was really glad to come, and it's an honor to meet you, John. Thanks for talking to me.
We only have about a minute left with you. Obviously, this is a big question in terms of like the next round of negotiations for the U.S. Media rights. When will meaningful talks begin, and will you be the person leading those talks on AEW's behalf?
Yeah, I will be. And I have had great conversations with the people at Warner Brothers Discovery about the partnership, and I'm very happy with our great partnership. And the new management that's come in from Discovery has great expertise in many areas, including streaming, which is an area where I believe we can expand our partnership, in addition to the great television we put on every week with Wednesday Night Dynamite on TBS every week and Friday Night Rampage on TNT. And we can expand, I think, internationally together. And also, as I said, there's opportunities in streaming and also reality TV, which is one of the incredible core competencies where Discovery is a worldwide leader. So a lot of great opportunities together for the future, hopefully for a really, really long time with AEW and Warner Brothers and Discovery.
All right. I was told a hard 5 minutes, and that is what we hit. Tony.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you coming in and talking to me about all this and about AEW. So I don't want to rush you. Thanks for taking the time, John.
No, we appreciate the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for coming in. And I really appreciate you coming over and saying hi. It was an unexpected pleasure today to see you. I've enjoyed your writing for a long time, and your coverage of pro wrestling. And thank you for being a fan of pro wrestling and somebody who hopefully enjoys what AEW does. And it's really nice to just meet you in person. Thanks for coming over, John.
And that was our own John Pollock speaking to AEW's Tony Khan. Very nice of Tony to be able to make some time, again, albeit a bit brief at the end of his day at the Collision Festival. So hopefully a bit more of a lengthier chat between John and Tony Khan can happen in the future. But before we get to some of your thoughts, Bruce, about the interview, I do want to go through some of the notes from his actual presentation itself. This comes to us, of course, from John Pollock as well. This was very much a presentation, I would say, for the non-wrestling fan, people who may not be familiar with what AEW is, but he did get into some interesting information that I think is relevant for our audience. Talked about how, the AEW pay-per-view business has grown rapidly. They have the #1 wrestling show in the UK with their relationship with ITV, and then a subscription service that's available on Fight TV for international audiences. He mentioned how the majority of AEW's revenue comes from US media rights. Streaming programs online serve as a type of farm system for them, and specifically made mention of the Acclaimed and Red Velvet coming out of the streaming shows that AEW produces to go on to become TV stars. He said Toronto would be a great place to come to, near or at the top of the list of countries to go to, Canada. He said about Canada that the time is soon. They could come here very soon. Speaking about Forbidden Door, he talked about how he expects over 15,000 people to attend the show at the United Center with a gate of over $1 million. He called New Japan Pro Wrestling probably the third largest wrestling company in the world. And speaking of ROH, he noted how AEW took part of its market share when they launched. He mentioned Supercard of Honor being among the top 2 to 3 shows ROH has ever done. He said ROH can stand on its own, not working for AEW, but rather with AEW. Tony also said he's working to bring ROH back with weekly television and is hopeful of announcing another ROH pay-per-view soon. Speaking of a streaming deal, he says it's definitely being worked on and believes AEW can expand with reality programming and interest in seeing the backstage environment of the company. There's a lot of interest and demand for the AEW library. And Khan also noted that I work pretty much all the time. I'm awake. Bruce, any of your thoughts on any of the information we heard from Tony Khan?
I mean, it's a plethora of information coming at you pretty fast there. And, God bless Tony Khan. He seems to be a natural born promoter. being able to work in the breakdown of pretty much every match happening on Dynamite, tonight, and then the Forbidden Door pay-per-view coming up on Sunday. You get the sense that he could manage to work those things in a chat with a barista while he's ordering coffee. So good on him for that. But I'm very excited, of course, about the possibility of there being an AEW pay-per-view in Toronto, I'm assuming it's going to be Toronto rather than Montreal or Vancouver. Although the possibility of maybe getting TV out here on the West Coast would be nice at some point. So that's really interesting. And then of course the talk about streaming, I think is in terms of the back catalog and where that might find a home, and to do things like dark elevation, would they migrate over behind a particular streaming service, were that to be the case. I have to imagine that that's going to be very closely tied with you know the actual main TV and media negotiation deals, and that'll obviously be driving things. But it could be entirely possible that we see something, some sort of streaming deal that emerges out of whatever the renegotiated TV situation is. And again, just him reiterating the fact that, look, that's what drives the money here. You know, you guys talk about this all the time in terms of Raw. Brandon Thurston is always talking about it in terms of the apparent split between the creative quality of main roster WWE and how the stock is doing or whatever it is. And I know I'm sure I've said this before on these morning news shows. I just really hope that the kind of the general wrestling fan sort of is aware of just how much that is really what is driving money in the industry and the funding of projects like the WWE or AEW.
John managing to, I guess, get confirmation that Tony will be in charge of these renegotiations, I think is a continued reminder of just how much this guy continues to have on his plate. Whereas obviously in the WWE, you have somebody like Nick Khan really helping with those types of conversations. Here you have a guy who not only is in charge of the creative currently for your professional wrestling show, he's there every single week producing the show, not to mention running a football team and a soccer team on the highest levels, or at least, being big contributors to both of those big machines. And then also having to, head into the negotiation room with his broadcasting partners as well. So it's coming up to be a crucial time for this company. And I mean, every single one of these ratings performances is going to be important for the company going forward. So that is the latest on Tony Khan and AEW. And of course, we will talk about AEW Dynamite a little bit later on this podcast. But first, let's talk a little bit about Raw ratings from Monday. Raw this week, as I pull up this little graphic here, of course, of Elias and Ezekiel. Raw pulled in the second highest viewership of the year, finished number one on cable. The June 20th edition of the show from Nebraska averaged 1,986,000 viewers and approximately 709,000, or a 0.54 in the demo, according to Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics and Showbuzz Daily. Raw was number one on cable, despite competition from the Stanley Cup Finals on ABC. Monday's Raw increased by 17% in overall viewers and 26% in the key demo from last week's show. There was a giant increase among females 18 to 49, which grew 46% this week, with adults 18 to 34 increasing by 27%. All the key demos for Raw increased double digits from last week's program. In terms of overall viewership, it was the second highest third hour of Raw this year. The main event, of course, was the only pre-promoted match on the show, which was between Becky Lynch and Asuka. Also, of course, worth noting that we did have a Vince McMahon appearance on the show, but it was not promoted beforehand. So I don't know if we can necessarily look towards that as any sort of indication, but this continues the trend of very high ratings for SmackDown, which of course did have a pre-promoted Vince appearance. Bruce, do you think WWE in general might be on an upswing in terms of ratings because of this added attention, or is it another factor?
I mean, it would not surprise me to learn that, kind of the very casual WWE viewer who may or may not be one of the, people in the crowd just vociferously, cheering for Vince. You guys have already kind of talked about the optics of that. Yeah, there has to be a certain amount of rubbernecking going on with that. But I mean, the fact that, like you said, this one wasn't announced. I don't think anybody was really anticipating the kind of the surprise walkout on Raw after seemingly how kind of brief and not necessarily final, but the fact that it was almost a kind of a sentimental sort of message that Vince was giving on Friday. I don't know that anybody was really anticipating him to come out on Monday, but now that that has happened, yeah, we might start to see people continuing to check it out in case something does happen. Maybe this is maybe just reading too much into the tea leaves, but maybe there's something to do with announcing a premier match between two well-respected talents who have something of a reputation for being able to actually wrestle well in a ring, and letting folks know that they will be able to see that match if they tune into your 3-hour program. Call me crazy, but I just have to think that that's sort of promotion, going back to what Tony Khan was just doing a minute ago, might actually have a bit of an effect on some people's interest in your product. Again, I'm pretty upfront about the fact that the WWE just isn't a product I really enjoy or pay much attention to right now. But I think we're at a point where it seems as though there's been enough sort of siloing or separation of people who still do enjoy WWE and the type and style of programming that they are delivering, and things like the Ezekiel Elias business is not necessarily my cup of tea, but there's obviously some people who've really been enjoying it, and so I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And those sorts of programs, those sorts of storylines are going to be able to continue to maintain that very dedicated fan base that I feel as though we've kind of, maybe even previously, kind of saw bottomed out. Like, I don't think you're going to fall much lower than this. And so having things like the Vince story or, a well-promoted women's match, yeah, probably draws a few more people in than usual.
It'll be interesting to see what they, pin perhaps the successes of these two shows on. We talked a bit about Friday ratings where, Vince being promoted ahead of time, I'm sure helped. Though he was only in the show for about 30 seconds, honestly. And then wasn't necessarily the highest rated segment. But again, that was only because he was there for 30 seconds. Did it contribute to retaining people for the main event? And will this give them more justification for having Vince McMahon continue to appear on television? In spite of being investigated for misconduct. We shall see. So that is WWE Raw. Sticking with WWE here, just some notes from NXT 2.0. For a full review, of course, I encourage everybody to go check out our friends at Up Next, who are now on YouTube, or at least are uploading doing live broadcasts also on YouTube. So please go give those guys a subscribe at Up Next Podcast. They're trying to get to 1,000. I think they're only 48 away. So go over to their channel and hit the like, hit the subscribe. But a few notes coming off of NXT 2.0 last night. Jordan Devlin, after losing a loser leaves NXT UK match against Ilya Dragunov recently, is set to make his return actually to NXT, but this time NXT 2.0. And of course, he is going to have a brand new name. His new name will now be known as JD McDonough. And he is making the long drive from Ireland, it seems, all the way here to Florida.
Might be tricky.
Yeah, but a very slickly well produced vignette here from Jordan Devlin. What are your thoughts on the name and maybe Jordan Devlin being in NXT?
The name is what it is. We've gone through it so many times. Some of them are slightly goofier than others. This one seems, at least to to somebody not of particularly Irish descent, seems relative. It could be worse in terms of some very kind of like plastic patty sort of name that they could have possibly found for him. So that's fine.
Patty.
Yeah.
Would that be a gimmick?
No. Plastic patty just referring to like Americans who like to play up their Irish heritage and whatnot. People in Boston who drink green beer and whatnot. Anyway, but I don't know if this is a case of like them sort of thinking that a change of scenery. I don't know if they're thinking that this will help / kind of to rehabilitate Devlin after everything speaking out related that's happened there. I mean, NXT UK is just so off on an island by itself. No one is talking about it. It is just kind of it's just a warehouse full of wrestlers who may or may not be wrestling. It's a tree falls in the woods. If somebody wins the NXT title, or the NXT UK title, does anybody hear about it? Sort of scenario there. I'm not the person to talk to about the question of how a British audience is sort of reacting not just to the product, but also to the various people who have been involved in speaking out, or who at least were named in speaking out, and whether or not those people are just sort of viewed as kind of, just a no-go within the UK or the British Isles, including Ireland. So, this might just be a case of, well, look, he's a talented guy, and we imagine that people have forgotten about this, and therefore bringing him over to NXT, it's a bit of a nice hard reset for him. All that unpleasantness is in the past, and, we're going to get whatever we can get out of, at least objectively speaking, in ring, one of the better, of the British and Irish talents that they swept up all those years ago.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of somebody like a Jordan Devlin, and a number of people who have been, I guess, called out during speaking out, I it's a very difficult subject to talk about, obviously. But it's also one where I don't know what the appropriate response is, because we haven't had any charges laid. We haven't had even like any sort of necessarily like concrete proof for these allegations. So if you are a company like the WWE, I don't necessarily think just letting somebody go is appropriate course of action, and therefore, what else do you do with somebody like Jordan Devlin? But to continue to move them up the ladder, and I think that's where we are here. I'm almost sorry to say, like, it's going to be one of those issues that unless it gets pressed further in the courts or something like that, we're really not going to see much resolution to it, and it puts the audience in an uncomfortable position. But if you're a company handling it, I don't see a way out of it, unless you're going to choose to do your own investigation, I suppose. And maybe they have, and I would assume have gone through appropriate checks. But anyway, that is the Jordan Devlin situation. More about that, of course, in the weeks to come as he makes more frequent appearances. But also somebody who's a part of NXT 2.0, recently returned, is Apollo Crews, and we got to continue to see some of these wonderful vignettes of Apollo Crews now after vanquishing the annoying customer at the diner. It seems like Apollo Crews has set his sights on alleyway loiterers, because here you see he continues to write in his journal. He's thinking out loud. He's talking about being fearless, and there's a NXT representative, George, right there. And he's just, anyway, these are very interesting because I don't exactly know what the intent is. Like, the idea is that Apollo Crews is fantasizing about beating up these bullies, and then he snaps out of the fantasy only to suggest that he's going to do exactly what he has fantasized about. So I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to gather from this. Like, is he like saying he's building up the courage to like do what he's fantasized about and beating up these bullies? This is cheesy as hell, I have to say. I think it's well shot, but God, like, here's one thing I will say about NXT. This is more development than we've ever had for Apollo Crews on the main roster. Okay, when was the last time you got a video package for Apollo Crews? Right, so I'll give him that, but like the content of it is still a bit perplexing.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, are we going with some sort of like vigilante character? Is this about him overcoming his internal self-doubt about whether he's strong enough to stand up to bullying slash, just, or has the courage to just, assault people in diners because, that's what you do. It's very odd. And the fact that you get the like kind of the double flashback of it, like, is this some whole like Patrick Bateman American Psycho? We now have to question whether or not the entire movie we watched was just some elaborate power fantasy or whatever it might be. Look, who can tell with the way that individual stories and characters are being presented within NXT? It's just such a crazy open sandbox that doesn't even seem to have its own continuity or flavor in terms of logic or tone or world building. It's just a complete free for all. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And Cruz is someone who obviously can absolutely go in the ring, and had a couple of moments within his first NXT run and then on the main roster where that was given some shine. But I think he was often hampered by initially being brought up as part of the new era. You remember that whole draft class that he was part of, and then of course the infamous story with Commander Aziz and drum matches and whatnot, which we seem to have moved in an entirely different direction away from, probably for the best there.
So that is NXT 2.0. Now, Bruce, one of the great things about having various different people on is because I think everybody kind of has their own different types of consumption about pro wrestling. And when I asked you if there are any topics you wanted to talk about, you suggested talking about a couple very notable independent wrestling matches that have taken place recently. And I was very grateful because it gave me an excuse to go and watch and check out some of what was going on. The first of which is a match that took place on January 10th, but was only recently uploaded for free on this promotion's YouTube channel, and that is West Coast Pro. And we're here to talk about Mike Bailey versus Konosuke Takeshita. What drew your attention to this one, Bruce?
I've been hearing good things about West Coast as an indie promotion over the last 6 months, year or so, or something like that. And so when I heard that this match had made its way over to YouTube, I definitely made it appointment viewing. In addition to the fact that it's a well enough respected indie, I think this is a really interesting match because we're looking at two guys who are very well polished, very well practiced in terms of in-ring, but really have not, for very different reasons, had much exposure within the United States until very recently in Takeshita's case, or at least for a long while in Mike Bailey's case, right? So you've got two people that have, I think, so many interesting matchups and opportunities still left in front of them. So on paper, it looked like it was going to be, a very solid match, and it absolutely delivered. It could have, a match like this, in a West Coast indie very easily could have been, just nothing but a spot fest, but it definitely wasn't. It's very kind of, counter and evasion based. You had Takeshita doing these really cool kind of like striking and power spots, often from like a defensive or weakened position, hitting moves while he's, on the floor or on his knees or whatever it might be. So it made for a really, really interesting blend of, somewhat different in-ring styles. And I think, again, hopefully by now, most North American fans, who pay attention to wrestling, maybe outside of AEW and WWE, have gotten a real sense of what it is that these two guys are capable of. So it was a really, really nice showcase for them, I thought.
For people asking, I just uploaded the link into the chat room. It'll also be available in our show descriptions if you're listening to the podcast or at postwrestling.com. But I'm in total agreement, Bruce. I felt like this was two world-class talents, basically, being able to display themselves for about 17 minutes and 50 seconds here was the exact time. And I feel as though Takeshita is making tremendous use of his time in the U.S. For somebody who's only been here like for 2 months, something like that, came here only after like WrestleMania weekend. I feel like I'm hearing way more about him than like I should in a short amount of time. It feels like he's already been here forever. Like in a couple months, I think, obviously has been on AEW a whole lot, but now making some runs on the indies and having some very notable matches here against a former tag team partner of his in DDT. I also really loved having, of course, Vita Scott on commentary, the wife of Speedball, Mike Bailey, able to provide a lot of personal commentary about the relationship between these two. But beyond that, I think she's just a fantastic commentator anyway. Yeah. And I would love to continue to hear her on a bigger stage. I know she's kind of done these like one shots, mini tournament types of things for AEW and Impact, but I would love to hear her on a more consistent basis for either of those promotions. And Mike Bailey is on fire right now. What more can you say? You wanted to maybe talk a little bit about perhaps how Impact you think should be treating him. He, of course, just won the X Division Championship at Slammiversary. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think Bailey and the run that he's on, and how that has been able to happen simultaneously, as we were saying, on the Mania weekend shows, and yeah, and and an indie like West Coast Pro, it's a real demonstration of the value that I think Impact has within the current wrestling landscape, in that it is an entity that has a much higher level of exposure than any of these indies do, even if it is not at certainly not at the level of a New Japan or an AEW or anything like that. Bailey is someone who, even after that Mania run, I do think if you brought him into either the WWE or AEW, it could have been very easy for him to get lost and not be given the sort of profile and focus that I think he is deserving of. There was a lot of discussion this past weekend, kind of to do, whether it's Nate or other people, kind of talking about kind of their memories and views of what the longer legacy and history of TNA/Impact is over the past 20 years, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that. I'm a very casual viewer of Impact, right? I'll pick up 2-3 pay-per-views a month, maybe if there's a match on it that really piques my interest. But I do think that when you have those discussions, things really do come back to the X division being kind of the one of the, if not the major through line throughout that that company's history. And I really think that Bailey is someone who could very much feels very new, feels very fresh, isn't overexposed on American television, has so many fresh matches still lined up ahead of him, but I think could really ably kind of carry on that sort of tradition and that sort of style that I think a lot of diehard Impact fans still go to the company for, and hope to see matches of him and Ace Austin and things like that. He's just such a great worker when it comes to that style, that I think they've really kind of lucked out in finding someone who is he's not an undiscovered gem. He was just somebody who, for these reasons wasn't able to get onto American television, and now has, just such a great run ahead of him if they kind of stay the course and kind of make him, if not the centerpiece of the entire company, the centerpiece of that division, and kind of give that division and give that championship the respect and profile that I think, again, a lot of people who still have a lot of love and nostalgia for Impact, hope to see it get. So I think it's a really, really nice spot for Mike Bailey, and I think it'll pay dividends for Impact. Again, like as a very casual viewer, knowing that there's going to be him versus a high profile or interesting opponent, that's the sort of thing that draws a more casual viewer like me in.
Totally agree. Yeah, much like Josh Alexander, like Mike Bailey is somebody who I feel like is in a perfect spot in a company like Impact. Like in AEW, I feel like he would just be one of, X amount of people who would probably get lost in the shuffle in Impact. And I hope this company, treats him as like the potential, at least, centerpiece of a division. I mean, it's a chance to elevate the X division to a standard of, or at least, the prestige, I suppose, of the heavyweight division. When you have, like, listen, we're picking out a match like this to talk about randomly, right? If Impact had that once in a while, a match from Mike Bailey or whoever else that catches that amount of buzz, I mean, that's exactly the type of promotion and press that they need. So I hope they treat him well. The other match we want to talk about, sorry to cut you off here. We are running just a bit closer on time, but because I wanted to get your thoughts on Nick Wayne versus Will Ospreay from GCW. This just took place over the weekend in Providence, Rhode Island. GCW, I Never Liked You. We have a show report from John Pine up on the site, but we both had a chance to watch this. What did you think about this match, Bruce?
Again, very much like the previous match, this was one that I think in a lot of folk, maybe casual folks' mind, or people who maybe haven't watched a Will Ospreay match, in the past 3 or 4 years, it could have, and given that it's a GCW match, you could imagine a world or a case in which, again, this just turns into a kind of no selling, nor no story, just, get your shit in, 10-minute, sort of explosion. And look, I'm not going to say this wasn't a match that had a lot of fast action and high spots. But I thought the pace and the selling in this match were really, really excellent. You had obviously, Wayne in the, charismatic, young, plucky underdog position. But interestingly, this wasn't a story about Ospreay underestimating Wayne or looking down on him. Like, yes, he was kind of, flicking him around and kind of, sort of like scoffing at him initially. But also, and the commentary did a great job of putting this over, also part of the story was that, like, look, Will Ospreay knows who Nick Wayne is because he is a major blue chip prospect. He scouted him. He knows what his moveset is. He knows what his style is. He knows that he depends upon the Poison Rana, and Will Ospreay is ready to counter that Poison Rana. And that made for just such a cool little story throughout it, that yes, obviously we know who's going to win this match. Yes, obviously we know that it'll be a long time before Nick Wayne is in a major position, on a major television company, or presumably AEW or whatever it might be. But this was a match that made a lot out of the amount of buzz that Wayne has. I thought really played to his strengths. You had a crowd that was obviously, going to be entirely behind Wayne, which was, the way the story should have gone. I thought it was a great opponent for Ospreay's first GCW match. I was kind of surprised when I kind of realized that oh yeah, this is his first GCW match. In a way, this match, and this just could be personal bias, but this sort of reminded me of the Will Ospreay Amazing Red match from the 2019 Super J Cup, which I was lucky enough to see live in Seattle, in that going in an opposite direction, but it was once again this sort of cross-generational story of respect and inspiration, right? In that case, again, we knew that Ospreay was going to defeat Red, but the whole story there was the fact Ospreay sort of saying, like, look, I wouldn't be a wrestler if it wasn't for you, and you're exactly the sort of person that I wanted to become, and it's a privilege to be working and fighting you here. And the same obviously being happening between Wayne and Ospreay here, with Ospreay being somebody that Wayne has modeled himself after. Again, much like Impact, I'm somebody who can really take or leave GCW. I'm generally not a big fan of the over the top comedy stuff or the deathmatch stuff. Just not really my cup of tea. But a match like this that I think just really fires on all cylinders in terms of in-ring. It's great to see, a match like this being given such a prominent spot in front of a crowd that I think really understood and respected what was going on.
Mm-hmm. GCW, I feel like, has received a bit of negative press as of late. I really like since the World at that Hammerstein Ballroom show. I think public opinion about GCW certainly has gone down, either from maybe the disappointment of that show to like the stunts, and just things like that. This, to me, it was a definite win for the promotion. One that it provided a wonderful moment to, I think, anybody who's a Will Ospreay fan or a Nick Wayne fan. It was essentially a match of two mirror images, or at least Will Ospreay versus a younger version of himself. And he even noted how in the post match address, how he got a little freaked out because Nick Wayne even looks a little like himself. So and like you, Bruce, what stood out to me is that I think it's a type of match that really showcased Nick Wayne at 17 years old, recently only turning 17. He's not just a guy, he's not just a spot monkey, he's not just a guy who does high spots. Displayed some great selling in this match, great babyface fire in his comebacks, and of course he also has incredibly flawless execution of some very impressive acrobatics and very impressive moves. Ospreay also said after the match that he started to get emotional during the introductions. He started asking, because he said Nick Wayne even looks a little like him, he asked his mom, who was in attendance, if she was sure that she didn't have a fling with Ospreay's dad about 16 years ago. This began a chant of "We love moms" before Ospreay realized that it was Father's Day and became very disappointed within himself. He admits that he can be an asshole sometimes and self-deprecatingly encourages Wayne to look for some better idols. But of course, it was a really nice emotional moment here. Totally out of character. He was not playing a heel at all. Will Ospreay was total babyface here and completely appropriate for the occasion. It was a wonderful moment for people who got to see it. And the show is $14 on Fight. So support your independent wrestling right there. And Ospreay, important to note, like I was just kind of looking up his cage match. This is a man coming off of a severe kidney infection, okay? Not that long ago. Since then, he's appeared on Rampage, flew over to Japan, won the U.S. Championship at Dominion, flew back, had the match with Dax Harwood. I think I wonder if will be talked about by the end of the year. Dropped the Warrior Wrestling Championship on Saturday. Had this match with Nick Wayne on Sunday. It's supposed to be on Dynamite tonight, and then we'll do Forbidden Door on the weekend. So he's back. You know,
it really puts the lie to that. There were some people sort of calling into question his, when he was back in the UK, kind of during that, tiff or whatever it might have been with the New Japan front office with regards to the belt. Really kind of puts the lie to the fact that, or to this speculation that he's not motivated to work or whatever it is, and I think he's somebody who has been relatively, let's say, pretty upfront about, his own, mental health issues and this and that, and who knows the degree to which that can sort of drive, someone's ability to kind of, get through an intense schedule like this. But yeah, at least right now, we're just seeing a continuation of the crazy run that he's been on pretty much since the beginning of the year. And, as you pointed out there, just showing up in so many different places in so many different companies, and working with a range of different styles, right? Where he's going to occupy a very different position in a GCW and in a GCW match than he is in, New Japan, than in AEW, right? These are all very different contexts in which he has to work, sometimes within the same 24-hour period or whatever. So yeah, real testament to his flexibility, not just in terms of pure schedule, but also the different types of spots and the different positions that he's been placed in.
AEW Dynamite tonight. It is our go-home show ahead of Forbidden Door. And on the show, as we mentioned, Will Ospreay will be appearing. He will be teaming with Aussie Open to take on Orange Cassidy, his Forbidden Door opponent, as well as Roppongi Vice, who are scheduled to face FTR and Jeff Cobb and Great O'Khan for the combined IWGP Tag and ROH Tag Team Championships at Forbidden Door. Also, in our All-Atlantic Championship qualifying match, the last one, we have Penta Obscuro taking on Malachi Black. They will go on to meet the Pac, Miro, as well as Tomohiro Ishii at Forbidden Door. We have Jericho and Lance Archer taking on Jon Moxley and Hiroshi Tanahashi. Moxley and Tanahashi, of course, will be one of the main events for the interim AEW Championship at Forbidden Door. We also have Marina Shafir taking on Toni Storm. Christian Cage will speak after turning on Jungle Boy last week. And perhaps the thing of most interest going into the show, Bryan Danielson will address his status for Forbidden Door as well as Blood and Guts. Since this was announced yesterday, we've at least heard a bit more speculation, particularly coming from Brian Alvarez, who noted that Bryan may not be cleared. So, Bruce, first of all, your thoughts on Bryan, and also secondly, maybe your overall interest in Forbidden Door right now.
If you take a look at the AEW website, their sort of run sheet for tonight's show, they have this headlined as "Return of the Dragon?" ? And it does also specifically mention, the ZSJ challenge in that as well. So if he isn't cleared, they are not shying away from the fact that everybody is talking about this, and everybody is hopeful, of course, that we do get that long-awaited dream match. I don't know. I on the one hand, I sort of admire the fact that they are being honest about the about the talk and about the speculation about everybody's hopes that this match will go ahead, and maybe that deserves to be credited. But on the other hand, if we are in a position, and who knows, right? If it's still an open, it might be a question, right? We might not literally have an answer about Danielson's status until today or yesterday or something like that. So if it has been an open question, then fine. But also, if it was known to be a no-go like a week or so ago, I kind of feel like that's something you would have wanted to have gotten out ahead of earlier. Now not just whatever it is, 4 or 5 days away from the pay-per-view. So I'm wondering if it has been kind of a down to the wire sort of question as to whether or not the match could go ahead. Obviously, it's one that both guys have talked about off and on for a couple of years. It is to my mind, it is a legitimate dream match. It does deserve that sort of that title or description. So like everybody else, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that it goes ahead. But yeah, it might just be a case of the medical picture not coming into focus until the last minute. And we know that, Bryan is somebody who will kind of fight tooth and nail, even to his own detriment at times, to be able to, work his way in onto a show, or to keep a match going. So could be that. In terms of the rest of the card, looks, decent enough. It's a very rare way to sort of have the classic, Monday night, can they coexist before the pay-per-view tag match? I don't know. Maybe it's happened once before on an episode of Dynamite, but I don't know if I can recall one immediately to mind. And as long as a habit isn't made of this, that's fine. And certainly the sheer novelty of having Hiroshi Tanahashi in an AEW ring makes this a little bit different than the usual, kind of go home match before a pay-per-view in which we have, opponents tagging together. I have to imagine that Archer is going to be the one to take the loss here. I don't know that that'll necessarily really hurt his standing heading into the G1. The New Japan crowd seemed to really, really get excited when his name was announced. So, it's a case of just there being enough interesting moving parts and personalities and different styles in there that should be fun. In terms of the six-man, I have to imagine that United Empire are getting a win back after losing the first match. So presumably that'll be Rocky doing the honors. The Storm and Shafir match is kind of interesting. Obviously, I think, they realize that they have Storm on a really good roll right now. And the question of whether or not she should have lost the match to Britt originally, fine, we can maybe move beyond that. I just sort of play the hot hand right now. I'm somebody who, I've seen a lot of Shafir on Dark. And on the one hand, the style and the presentation that she has is so different and unique, and at times looks exactly the way that you would want a shoot style pro wrestler to look and work. But at other times, it's just, the actual in-ring has been, just a little bit slow and awkward. Obviously, Toni Storm is a veteran and should be able to, get a better performance out of her than some. And then, of course, I think like everybody else, I am presuming that we have, the match should be great, so it hardly matters. But you have to imagine that Malachi Black will be the fourth man in there to prevent, Penta and Pac from clashing in the four-way. But it's possible they could surprise us. But either way, that is shaping up to be a great four-way match, whichever one of these two guys comes out of it tonight.
And of course, we wait to see if any more New Japan names get announced. What is the status of Kazuchika Okada for this show? Jay White presumably will be. He did state that he will be defending, but we just don't know against who. So with that match, we have 7 matches currently scheduled for Forbidden Door. As I mentioned, the tag team title match between FTR, United Empire, and Roppongi Vice. We have for the AEW Women's World Championship, Thunder Rosa versus Toni Storm, Will Ospreay versus the Orange Cassidy, and it states here it's for the U.S. Heavyweight Championship. So I didn't realize that, but okay. We have Les Sex Gods, Jericho and Sammy Guevara taking on, with Minoru Suzuki, taking on Eddie Kingston, Wheeler Yuta, and Shota Umino. And then we have the All-Atlantic Championship match between Pac and Miro and Malachi Black or Penta Obscuro and Tomohiro Ishii, and as well Jon Moxley versus Hiroshi Tanahashi. So, we're 1 out of 10 in terms of interest. How would you grade this card on paper thus far, Bruce?
I'd probably go, just because it has such a high ceiling, the possibilities, are endless, as Chris Charlton would say. So, I'd probably go with like a 7 right now, maybe a 6.5, simply because of the Okada question, simply because of the Danielson, ZSJ question. And again, as I think I was saying, maybe about a week ago on the news show, just the fact that we don't really have a clear sense as to where some of your major players like, Jay White and Paige are going to be falling. And, it's not a case that, you need to introduce Jay White to an AEW audience. I'm not saying that, but I do think that there is benefit to just letting those guys, cut promos and have warm-up matches and, be able to actually build towards this. The sheer novelty of, theoretically, still probably the 2 most respected in-ring promotions, for the discerning online wrestling fan, just the concept of them, doing a joint promotion is still, going to have, a large amount of interest on that name alone. But in terms of the actual potential matches that could be executed, could be better, could be worse.
So we will be back, of course, me and John Pollock tonight covering AEW Dynamite on Rewind to Dynamite. But first, some super chats here. And today's edition of Post Daily News is brought to you by Rory from Australia, because he sends a couple of super chats here. Thank you so much, as always, for the support, Rory. His first super chat and the amount of $8 Australian dollars. He says, with half my family in Ireland, I'm surprised they went with a relatively inoffensive name, referring to J.D. McDonough.
I think McDonough. I've forgotten already.
He says, but yeah, they need to get better with UK, Ireland talent and acts. His second super chat, really pumped for Dynamite in the morning. Can't wait for ZSJ to attack Brian. If Omega appears, I'll mark out the same with the coin drop. Joe Poe, great job on the interview. Kenny Omega. I mean, as far as like injuries go, I feel like I'm not expecting him, but do you expect some sort of involvement on the show?
I think you could absolutely do a, depending on what sort of timetable we're looking at. If we're still looking for, say, like the next pay-per-view, which is going to be what, month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, something like that from now, if that is a possibility, I do think Omega is, a star to the degree that you can just sort of say, will have his first match back at the next pay-per-view, and certainly having just a video appearance or even an in-person walkout and challenge of whoever it happens to be, if Okada is there or whatever direction they want to send him off in. I think you could absolutely have him make an appearance, even if he's not going to be having an in-ring match, for another 2 months.
His last super chat from Rory says, show is on me today, guys. Can't wait for the Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling shows with Thunder Rosa and Willow Nightingale. New Japan Pro Wrestling's road shows will be fun. And I'm also getting into AAA, real fun stuff. So Rory giving some recommendations for everything else that's available out there. Are you watching any of these that he's just mentioned, Bruce?
I dip in and out of Tokyo Joshi sometimes. Their house style is not particularly my style of Joshi, but sometimes they will have, a main event that is a little bit more, to my mind, a little bit no frills and hard hitting. I know that Sheeta's had a couple of matches over there recently. I think somebody in the chat was sort of asking where she is, and she's been working there and doing Ice Ribbon and whatnot. And yeah, I think, Rosa and Willow are, obviously fantastic North American based talents. I would imagine that the Japanese audience will at least be pretty aware of Rosa. I think she's worked in Japan in the past, so yeah, would be really cool to see how they fare over there.
John just did send me a note here. He's still hard at work on the website with a bit of an update on Paul Levesque. So we'll probably discuss if there's anything notable later on tonight. But again, I will be back with John tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern time here at youtube.com/postwrestling. Bruce Lord, thank you so much, as always, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Where can people find some more of your takes on wrestling?
There's a little bit of hot taking happening on my Twitter. I don't interact with the app too much, but I'm there at Contrasoma. That's CONTRASOMA. It's mostly just Blue Jays talk, but a fair bit of wrestling makes its way in there as well. Of course, myself and David Myers do the monthly Postmarks podcast in your post wrestling feed on the Patreon, but available to everybody, even non-patrons. We are getting set to record another couple of episodes with members of the post wrestling community this coming weekend. Again, of course, Postmarks is the podcast in which David and myself talk to regular people who call into the shows, offer feedback, or maybe even participate, in terms of writing or podcasting within the broader post world about their fandom, about their own lives, and how their own histories with wrestling have changed over the years. So yeah, very much looking forward to recording a couple of more conversations with a couple of, I think, recognizable members of the post community this coming weekend. And of course, as always, I also have my main hustle unrelated to wrestling. That's idieudie.com and its associated We Have a Technical podcast. This is an enterprise that I run with my good friend Alex, in which we write and podcast about goth music, industrial music, EBM, darkwave, as we like to say, the darker alternatives of the musical world. So if that floats your boat, that's idieudie.com and the We Have a Technical podcast.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And again, I am at Way0937. I will see you guys tonight at 10 p.m. Until then, take care.